The final confirmed photograph of a giant in an official capacity is dated 1919. It shows a man, if that word still applies, standing outside a government building in an unidentified European city. He is wearing civilian clothes of the period. He is looking directly at the camera. He is approximately 9 feet tall. Nobody around him appears alarmed. A woman walks past without turning her head. 2 men in suits continue a conversation without pausing. Whatever this figure represented in 1919, he was not remarkable to the people sharing the street with him. 1 year later, they were gone. All of them. Everywhere. Simultaneously. That is not a natural extinction pattern. That is an event. I've mapped the photographic record carefully. The distribution is not random. Giant individuals appear consistently in photographs from the 1850s through approximately 1918. The frequency actually increases through the 1880s and 1890s. More photographs, more locations, more apparent integration into civic and professional life. Then, across a window of roughly 18 to 24 months spanning 1919, the record stops. Not gradually, not regionally, everywhere, at once. Newspaper accounts of giant skeleton discoveries, which ran regularly throughout the second half of the 19th century, also cease almost entirely after 1920. The Smithsonian, which had field agents documenting such finds through the 1910s, stops producing reports of this nature entirely. Academic journals that occasionally published accounts of extraordinary skeletal remains go silent on the subject. The 1920 boundary is too clean to be coincidental. Something was decided, something was organized, something ended. Within the Tartarian framework, the giants occupied a specific and documented role. Across Central Asia, Siberia, and the vast territories historically labeled Tartary on European maps, legends describe a race of enormous builders, men of extraordinary physical capacity, who constructed the megalithic infrastructure of the old world. Not mythological beings, not gods, workers, administrators, guardians of civic order. The architectural evidence supports a functional interpretation. Buildings across the former Tartarian territories and far beyond them, in North America, Western Europe, and Russia, share proportional characteristics that only make ergonomic sense if some of their occupants were substantially larger than modern humans. Doorways at 15 feet, ceilings at 30, staircases with treads twice the standard depth. These aren't ceremonial spaces. They are offices, courthouses, train stations, warehouses, functional environments that somebody used, daily, at a scale we no longer accommodate. But the giants of the photographic record were not confined to Central Asia. They appear in Pennsylvania courthouses, Missouri administrative offices, St. Petersburg government buildings, Kansas municipal halls. Whatever their origin, by the mid-19th century, they were distributed across the industrializing world, integrated into its institutions, photographed at its construction sites. They were global, which means their disappearance required a global solution. The most persistent theory about what happened after 1920 is also the most disturbing in its implications. They didn't die, they were removed. Somewhere between 1918 and 1922, a coordinated decision was made, by whom, operating through what institutional framework remains genuinely unclear, to relocate surviving giant populations away from urban centers and public life. The destinations proposed by serious researchers include remote regions of Siberia, the interior of Central Asia, underground facilities constructed specifically for this purpose, and isolated island territories placed under military jurisdiction in the early 20th century. The circumstantial evidence for organized removal, rather than natural extinction, is significant. There are no mass burial sites. If a global population of giants had died out naturally within a 2-year window, we would expect to find their remains in significant quantities in the archaeological record. We find almost nothing. The skeleton discoveries that peppered 19th century newspaper accounts stopped not because the skeletons stopped existing, but because the reporting of them stopped. A journalistic silence that coordinated across multiple countries and languages simultaneously is not organic, it is managed. The timing also aligns with one of the most significant periods of global institutional reorganization in recorded history. The aftermath of World War I saw the collapse of 4 major empires: Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, German, and the simultaneous construction of new international frameworks, the League of Nations, new border settlements, population transfers of enormous scale. Moving a population of giants within that chaos would have been logistically possible in a way that would have been impossible 20 years earlier or later. A second theory, harder to verify but impossible to dismiss entirely, proposes that the relocation was vertical rather than geographic. By the early 20th century, industrial civilization had developed the capacity to construct substantial underground environments. Railway tunnels, mine complexes, and military installations created precedents for subterranean habitation at scale. The theory proposes that surviving giant populations were relocated to purpose-built underground facilities, maintained, isolated, and systematically removed from public knowledge. The evidence cited for this theory is largely architectural and logistical. Several large government construction projects in the early 1920s involved excavations of unusual depth and scale that have never been fully explained by their official purposes. Access restrictions to certain underground military installations, particularly in remote regions of Russia, the American West, and Central Asia, have persisted with unusual rigidity through multiple changes of government and ideology. The underground theory also explains the absence of remains. A contained, managed population does not leave the kind of archaeological footprint that natural extinction produces. If they are still there, or were until recently, we would not find them in excavations. We would only find sealed doors. It would be a mistake to limit this investigation to the Tartarian territories. The photographic and skeletal evidence is genuinely global. Native American oral traditions, particularly among the Paiute people of the American Southwest, describe a race of red-haired giants who preceded them in the region. These accounts are not vague mythological references. They describe specific conflicts, specific locations, specific methods of eventual defeat. The Lovelock Cave excavations in Nevada, conducted in the early 20th century, produced skeletal remains and artifacts consistent with these oral accounts. Irish mythology preserves detailed accounts of the Fomorians, a race of enormous beings who inhabited the island before its current peoples. Norse tradition describes the Jotnar, giants who existed in complex relationships with human civilization, rather than in simple opposition to it. Mesopotamian texts reference the Nephilim. The consistency across cultures separated by geography and time suggests these accounts describe a real population, not a shared metaphor. What the post-1920 disappearance represents, in this global context, is not the end of a regional curiosity. It is the end of a species-level coexistence that had existed, in one form or another, across the entire inhabited world. I keep returning to this question. Not how, why. The how has possible answers: removal, isolation, managed decline. The why is where the investigation becomes genuinely unsettling. The 19th century was the century of standardization. Industrial capitalism required uniform labor, uniform measurement, uniform bodies moving through uniform spaces at uniform speeds. More significantly, they cannot be ignored. A 9-foot man in a room commands attention, authority, physical presence that no institutional arrangement can fully neutralize. In a century increasingly organized around the management of human attention and the consolidation of institutional power, that kind of unmanageable physical authority represented a structural problem. The giants, whatever their origin, were incompatible with the world that was being built around them. Not because they were dangerous, because they were visible. So the questions were removed along with the people asking them. I still think about the man in that 1919 photograph. He is looking directly at the camera. He knows he is being photographed. There is something in his expression, or perhaps I am reading something into it, that suggests awareness, not of the camera, of what the photograph represents, of the fact that soon there will be no more photographs. The buildings remain. The doorways are still 15 feet tall. The ceilings still reach 30. The staircases still have treads designed for a stride twice the length of mine. They are the most honest evidence we have. You cannot erase a building the way you can erase a file, or burn a document. The architecture stayed because it was too large to hide and too expensive to replace. Every time you walk through a 19th century courthouse and feel dwarfed by its proportions, you are experiencing the physical memory of a population someone decided we shouldn't remember. The giants didn't disappear. They were made to.